2.5 million. That's how many vapers it's estimated there are in the United Kingdom. And with nearly 9 million Britons still smoking, the number of vapers is expected to grow. That is, unless the European Union gets its way and successfully chokes the e-cigarette industry into submission with new anti-vaping regulations found in the Tobacco Products Directive. The TPD is viewed by most vapers as quintessentially EU, that is, an autocratic and bloated bureaucracy imposing excessively unsound regulations on a populace with no democratic right to appeal.
The Commission is a group of politicians, men and women, who meet every Wednesday in Brussels. We call them commissioners. Together, they form the government of Europe, so to speak. They all have their own specific field of responsibilities and come from different countries. It is their role to defend the general interest of the European Union. When they take their oaths, they swear not to accept instructions from their own government.
So what to do? Well, just a month after the TPD went into effect, UK vapers were presented an historic opportunity to vote on whether to remain or leave the European Union.
We, the people, are being cajoled, frightened, and bullied into surrendering our democracy and freedom. This film is a rallying cry. We must fight for our independence, for the right to determine ourselves the laws under which we live, and for the freedom to shape our own future.
This is the most important voting decision that any of us is going to make in our lifetime. With general elections, it doesn't really matter who you vote for, Conservative or Labour, because you know that in 4 years' time, you can change your mind. This time you can't change your mind. This time is for keeps.
According to a survey of UK vapers conducted by E-Cigarette Direct prior to the Brexit referendum, 89% reported the incoming TPD regulations as most likely to influence their vote, and 75% cited the EU's failed attempt to medicalize e-cigarettes as a driving factor. As you've undoubtedly heard, Leave won the day in a resounding 52% to 48% win. Now, did vapers make the difference? Possibly, as the E-Cigarette Direct survey did find that 18% of vapers were more likely to vote Leave than the average UK voter, representing 450,000 more votes for Leave than Remain, which equals 35% of the actual margin of victory in the Brexit referendum. Joining us today to talk vaping and Brexit is Clive Bates, Director of Counterfactual, a public interest consultancy and advocacy group. He's also an internationally renowned expert on tobacco control and a supporter of vaping. Clive, thanks for coming back on the show. First off, you have been a staunch critic of the TPD, yet you made a strong case for remaining in the European Union.
Yeah. Well, I, like many people in Britain, am quite Eurosceptic, and I see the European Union as a kind of mixed blessing, in some ways a sort of necessary evil.
And why is that?
The European Union accounts for about 45% of UK trade and about 44% of UK foreign direct investment. It's a very important economic relationship for the UK. Now, the problem is if you just go around severing the deep economic ties that we have with the EU through the single market, the danger is that you start to create adverse economic conditions. You get reduced investment, you get more uncertainty, you get less foreign direct investment, because the UK is a good launching point for foreign businesses who want to operate in an English language country but have access to the whole 450 million person European Union single market.
Clive, paint us a picture of what UK vapers were thinking in the run-up to the Brexit vote.
What I think happened for vapers is that, not that many people get to see the EU operating up close and personal. And if you've had the kind of experience that they've had, which is truly awful, I mean, you've seen how unaccountable, unscientific, arrogant that institution can be, then it's hardly surprising. You look at it and think, well, if it's all like that, I want absolutely nothing to do with it. And thank you very much, I'm off, Brexit. And that, that's a perfectly reasonable and respectable point of view. You go on the basis of what you know, and if what you know is really ugly, then that's where it leads to.
So is the widely held view amongst vapers that the EU is to blame for the TPD accurate?
I would feel that complaint was more valid if the UK had been, and the other member states where vapers are complaining, if the UK had been in a strong position, a pro-vaping position, and had been pushing against the mass ranks of the other member states, but it wasn't. The UK was right in the centre of crafting a really bad directive. So in many ways, the problem actually started with the UK, where we were initially pushing medicine regulation. That's a UK idea, borrowed in part from Canada and Australia, and trying to get it through the EU. And that was the position that we've been taking on and off since 2010, reaffirmed in 2013, and what actually shaped the directive. And luckily for us, and ironically, actually, it was the European Parliament in October 2013 that overturned the medicine directive, the medicines regulation approach. The problem is, at that point, they didn't pull the vapor products out of the directive and do something sensible. They just cobbled together a piece of really poor legislation in a secretive huddle to try and get the directive finished off by Christmas that year.
So to be clear about this, is the TPD a product of an autocratic EU?
The TPD is an EU thing. The legislation was initiated by the European Commission, and the European Commission consulted on including e-cigarettes, and despite a kind of overwhelming response saying don't do it, they still went ahead and did it. Now, that's a terrible thing to do because the EU directives are very inflexible.
Now, Clive, with the Leave campaign's promise to bring decision-making back home, and with the win, doesn't it now look more likely that the TPD will get binned?
First of all, it's highly likely, but not certain, that we will enter some kind of relationship with the European Union in which we retain our participation in the single European market. And the price for that will be that we comply with EU single market regulation, which includes the TPD.
Okay, but what would happen to the TPD if the UK government decides to sacrifice single market access for greater control?
For the first 2 years, after we actually trigger the process of leaving, nothing changes. And this is going to be the most damaging period of the TPD anyway. This is where we'll get the adjustment and the firms going bust and the product lines contracting. But even after that, if we do somehow escape the TPD, you have to ask, where in the list of priorities will the TPD come in British government's plans to reshape the European regulation? Simplest thing to do is just to keep that as the domestic law, keeps us able to trade with the EU pretty freely. I'm not sure they're going to be rushing to adjust that. There's so many other things that are going to be on their plate to get done.
Over the past 12 months, UK public health officials have really started coming around to a pro-vaping position. Do you see a missed opportunity to apply British influence over the TPD?
I did a case study on the TPD and vaping, just to show how this might actually play out. And my view is that we will sign some sort of agreement with the EU that maintains full access to the single market, and therefore we will continue to comply with the Tobacco Products Directive and whatever follows it. But in the meantime, we will lose influence, and that's a shame because our influence for once could be actually quite constructive.
So it sounds like that while vapers were good for Brexit, Brexit might not be so good for vaping.
That's right. So just at the point we've got a voice, together with France, for a positive stance on vaping that could change the direction of the TPD, we may find ourselves still complying with it, but losing that voice and having to rely on France alone to see off the Germans.
Well, that's it for this edition of RegWatch. Before you head off, please like us on Facebook and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. For RegulatorWatch.com, I'm Brent Stafford.